Hello, 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 everybody. It's Cecilia Stanton Adams. I am the CEO of Stanton Adams Consulting, and it's so good to see you all. Oh my gosh, some new faces, not old faces. So it's more youthful faces. Let's just say that. Danielle, oh my gosh, so good to see you. I'm so excited today, y'all, because I have a fabulous guest with me today, Jeff Wilson. And if you, I mean, I'm sure you've looked at the box at some point of Wilson's box, because he always has such a bright, beautiful smile on, and you just brighten up my virtual day every time I talk to you. So let's go on to the next slide. We'll take care of some housekeeping before we jump into the great conversation for today. As I said, I'm CEO of Stanton Adams Consulting. We've been going through a transformation process and discovering who are we today. So you will see new branding, Stanton Adams Strategic, and we're going to be focusing on working with social impact organizations that are at a turning point. Maybe they have a new person coming in to lead the organization, or they're a leader's leaving, right? Maybe they're having crisis or some sort of issue at the executive leadership team level. That is where I feel I bring my best skills to the table. And I get to bring in all of the great background and experience that I've built over the past 20 years, 20 plus, but I'm trying to keep youthful. Anywho, let's go to the next slide, Michelle. I want to do a quick introduction of my staff. So Olivia Husenfeld has been with me, forever. She grew up my daughter. She's my daughter. Well, actually, my daughter and my son-in-law's best friend, and she's my second daughter. So I love her so much. And she does a lot of behind the scenes. Also, Michelle Perdun, she is a graduate of the Art and Science of Diversity and Inclusion program. She has been with me as a consultant as well, and it's just been so great to have her. So she is managing all the technology behind the scenes. So this is what I'm doing next, y'all. If you have someone in your life, or you yourself want to build your leadership skills for today, I've got a program for you. And Danielle, you've been through that program. You went through the pilot of that program. So go
Amazing.
ahead. Yeah, thank you. Thank you
It's
so much.
amazing.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I think you say it right. We are going through a transformation. No matter whether you're doing DEI or whatever transformation, the skills that you brought and taught us is going to help. So thank you so much for that.
Awesome. Awesome. I didn't pay her for that. So check us out. Check us out. If you have any other needs, you always can reach out to me. If you have a question, most of y'all know, reach out to me and we can have a discussion. So let's go ahead on to the next slide here. All right, now for the exciting stuff, y'all. Okay, so first I have to say, I have a mentor, and he leads up Padilla Consulting, Padilla, and then they do public relations and communications. But Matt Kucharski has just been so amazing and has been with my business for years, through COVID, through George Floyd, and continues to stay in touch with me, and gives me and my wife great advice on how to continue to develop as a business. And, that means a lot, because mentorship is needed, not just, when you think of like school, when you're, or you're starting your career, as a business person, as a person, at my age, like there's so many different things that change in your life, and it's great to have that mentorship. So I thank Matt so much for that. And Matt introduced me to Jeff Wilson. And like, that was just such an amazing introduction, because, as soon as Matt read some of the things that I was doing, he was like, you got to meet Jeff. Jeff is leading up our DI much, much more. But also, has really kept the work of DEI alive, and has a really great point of view about, what's going on in the world today. And my first conversation with Jeff I was just feeling like really down and out. And he just made me feel so hopeful about the future, and that it's important that we never get stagnant, that we challenge ourselves to continue to evolve and grow no matter what we do. And when we do that, that's how we keep the work alive. So let's go to the next slide here. All right, so I want to give your flowers because you've done such amazing work in your life. So Jeff, a senior vice president at Padilla, where he leads the social impact consultancy, a team at the intersection of inclusion and belonging, community engagement, and corporate social responsibility. With more than 30 years of experience spanning public relations, marketing, journalism, business development, and higher education, Jeff has spent his career helping organizations find their voice on the issues that matter. A longtime advocate for inclusive workplace culture, Jeff has led award-winning campaigns, shaped internal culture strategy, and served on the national board of the Public Relations Society of America. He's also taught at Virginia Commonwealth University, Virginia Union University, and the University of South Carolina. He currently serves on the Diversity and Inclusion Council for Avenir Global, Padilla's parent company. Jeff brings a rare combination of strategic clarity and human candor to some of the most complex conversations in organizational life. And he joins us today to talk honestly about the topic that are on all our minds in the chat. And that is about DEI, what's happening. And before we jump into the heart of that work, I want to know, how has this work changed you? How has it impacted you as you've led through these difficult times?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for having me today. I'm super excited. I can't think. This is a great way to spend a Friday talking about a subject that is I'm very, very passionate about. And the only thing I'll say about Matt is I'm mad that he gate kept us apart. You've been working with and knowing him for years, and it hadn't been until this year that you and I started connecting, and it's as if we've known each other forever. So I was like, Matt, you've mentioned her, but why did you wait so long for this introduction and these wonderful conversations that you and I have been having? So thank you again for this. It's interesting. I know when one of our previous conversations, you talked about like how do you kind of stay rejuvenated and how do you kind of stay focused doing this kind of work. Um, and there are a few things that I do, but one of the things that we both have talked about, you talked about doing this for 20 plus years, you know, you can't get caught up in too much in the labels and what we call this thing. When I first started doing this, my first job out of college, I was a print journalism major before I made the switch to public relations. And my first job, I was from Greenville, South Carolina. I'm originally from South Carolina. I live in Richmond, Virginia now. Um, it was as a city government reporter and urban affairs, and that was a new position that they created. And urban affairs was the term that they were using to basically talk about DEI, but we didn't know what DEI was, back in the late mid to late 90s. So urban affairs, but it was finding those stories of underrepresented and marginalized populations and telling those stories openly and honestly. As I progressed through my career, I was there when we all started calling it multiculturalism. And it was multicultural marketing. And that's what we were doing, making sure that brands and companies were representative in the work that they were doing with the public, engaging um, with diverse audiences of all kinds. And then over the past several years, that's when we all coalesced around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and started doing this work. And that's when this evolution of this whole notion of BIPOC as a terminology was one that we started using. Then, the world turned upside down last year with the new administration coming in, and there's been this push um, to erase on their part DEI. So, and we'll talk more about this, but companies and organizations and myself have started pivoted. So, the work continues. We may be calling it different things, but the work is continuing, and the smart companies and the smart people are finding ways to continue the work in earnest. Um, So that's what keeps me optimistic, and that's what keeps me hopeful, and that's what keeps me continuing to do this kind of work. And Cecilia, I love the fact that your organization also is pivoting because we are at a flashpoint and a moment of change where the smart folks and the ones you're going to pivot with this change and continue to do this kind of important work because it's needed and people say they still need it, or the companies that it was performative, they're going to go by the wayside.
Yes. Yeah. And the more I talk to you and hear you talk about this work, it just reminds me when we're in it, it feels like a moment. And the way you talk about it, this is a cycle,
Yes,
a
for
cycle
sure.
that is going through its next evolution. And there's going to be another side,
Hmm.
right? Just like we are at this
For
side
sure.
of all the work that happened before us. So I love that. Now you're in Virginia, and Michelle, if you can
Hmm.
forward the slides to the yes next one. So Virginia. So I want to talk about this
Yes.
because I listen to the news every day, and I have my podcasters that I like to listen to, and I'm always hearing about different things that are happening in different parts of the country. And it's interesting because you can be experiencing something very different and not really know how other places are being impacted. And so I'd love to know what is not making the headlines, and
Hmm.
what are you seeing from your standpoint in Virginia?
So, Virginia is a really interesting state because I like to think of it as like a microcosm of the United States. It's everything from rural farm country to, again, I'm in Richmond, the state capital government. And then the further north you get, it's DC. So it is greatly impacted by what's going on with the federal government, government layoffs, all those kinds of things. But when we talked before, um, Padilla is headquartered in Minneapolis, so I like to refer to myself as Minneapolis adjacent. It goes back when I was in college. In college, as a print journalism major, my internships during the summer, 2 summers I spent as a reporting intern at the Star Tribune, and I was like, this was
Okay.
fun.
Yeah.
I'll never go back to Minneapolis. Like, who knows if I'll ever make it back to Minneapolis again? And I'm there all the time now. So when George Floyd happened, and again, we started doing this work in DEI before that, but after George Floyd happened, it was such a moment for everyone. And obviously in Minneapolis and Twin Cities and Minnesota, those were the big headlines that were happening. And we were affected, of course, in Minneapolis, but we were affected in all 7 offices that we have across the country, like everybody else was. What it did in Virginia, and I'll use this as an example because there are examples all over the country. Conversations that we were having in Virginia and in Richmond, particularly, they also started to bubble to the top. But those of you who are familiar with Virginia and Richmond, it is a capital of the Confederacy. So there is a major street that runs through the entire city of downtown in the city called Monument Avenue. And it's called Monument Avenue because there were these gigantic statues. And when I say gigantic, I'm talking between 60 and 90 feet tall of Confederate generals, Robert E. Lee, and all these others. And they were roundabouts. So if you're going down this cobblestone street, you have to drive around them and you cannot miss them. George Floyd became that impetus where it bubbled to the top, where the conversation started happening about what these monuments meant and what they symbolized, because they were put up during Jim Crow. They weren't put up during right after the war, and what they symbolize. So those monuments after George Floyd became this flashpoint where people were gathering at them, those roundabouts, and they became these public protest places, these celebration places. There's some amazing images. One is a Pulitzer Prize winning images where these black ballerinas were in front of the statue performing. There was another one where George Floyd image was projected at night on those statues. So the rallying cry in Virginia and many of the southern states that also had statues was take them down, and what that symbolized. And some of them were owned by the state of Virginia, some were owned by the city. And again, to describe Monument Avenue, there are these multi-million-dollar homes that line this street and still do. So, all these things were coming together. I live downtown, so I could hear at night, the police were trying to break up the crowds, the tear gas happening, those kinds of things. But again, because of George Floyd and Minnesota, it manifested itself in Virginia and other southern states of take down these symbols and what they stand for, in Charlottesville and other places as well. And they did come down. So you
Yeah.
still drive through there now. The symbols are gone. Um, um, but again, those are some of the things that we continue to kind of deal with. And I always kind of said, who would have thought that Minneapolis, the Twin Cities of Minnesota, that this would be the epicenter for some of the most complicated and complex
Yeah.
conversations that we're having across the entire country. And you've done it again with everything that's going on with ICE. And again, the ramifications. That's why I proudly say that I'm Minnesota and Minneapolis adjacent, because you all are leading the way and demonstrating in a way that others can learn from.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. It's very interesting. I could just imagine the emotions of what those statues represent, and then to see them come down. Were you present at any of them,
Oh
or
yeah.
like did you
Oh yeah.
feel
It was
anything?
it was all over the news. People started to gather because they, televised when they were coming down. So I went down there. People are in tears. You had folks who, you know, 90-year-old, I'll never forget this one 90-year-old woman, and she was like, I never in my lifetime thought I would see this happen, like in tears. If you had asked me before they came down, I was like, that sounds nice, but this really isn't going to happen. This is still Richmond. But to see them down, and I actually heard it was an African American business owner who was charged with taking the statues down. His construction company was charged with taking them down, and I heard him do a presentation at a PRSA meeting, and the death threats that he received just for taking them down, and all of the things that went along with that, and then the conversation about what are you going to do with them? Some are in storage, some have been loaned to museum in LA. You know, to learn from them the history behind it to help tell those kinds of stories. But it was a very, very emotional thing on both sides. For those of us who were like, they never should have been up. For those who try to like, it's heritage and history, it's not. But to just kind of be in the middle of it and to watch those. At one point in time, again, because I drive up and down Monument Avenue all the time, you saw them, but subconsciously you didn't think about them all the time.
Yeah.
So when all these things were happening as far as racial inequities and all these conversations that started to happen, you couldn't avoid it. Like they were in your
Yeah.
face. So to see these things come down, it definitely was kind of um, a major moment that to watch and to see. That was, I'll never forget it.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Whew, our country is going through it right now.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Yes. And that kind of brings me to the next question, and maybe a little bit more closer to what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, right? We know that things shifted. And
Yes.
I could say this is the major backlash to, some of the things that we were just talking about. And now, we've seen a huge retreat from diversity, equity, inclusion, um, especially from the corporations.
Hmm.
And I think that's really important because they're central to society, right? And we also are recognizing they have many large organizations have big investments in government, and how that also shapes their decisions about whether they're going to stand tall and stand behind DEI, or whether they were ready to let it go first chance, or those organizations that were like, hey, you know what? I see the writing on the wall. We're going to do this because this is who we are, but we
Hmm.
may have to do it differently. So, it's more like a commitment continuum is how, you've kind of phrased it here. And so would love to know, how can individuals tell the difference? And this is really based on some of the research that you shared,
Yes.
And Michelle will drop some of the links and documents that you've shared with me because they've been so informative in this. But if you could talk a little bit about this continuum and how do you
Yeah.
know where organizations sit?
It's funny, it's popped up and I was like, oh yes, I know slide very well. We've been studying and doing research on the state of DEI in the US and what it means. Um, I've been doing this for almost 2 years now, a year and a half now, after the changes that happened in the federal government. And we started to track again where companies landed. Obviously, you see the big names there on the side that did the public rollbacks. It was at first, it was interesting how it first started with like John Deere and Tractor Supply, and it kind of paid attention, but it didn't really pay attention because it was like, okay, that's agriculture. Think about who their audiences are, their targets, Harley Davidson. But then all of a sudden, in like February of last year, that's when McDonald's, started rolling back their DEI. And that's when Target did what it did, rolling back DEI. And Walmart and Amazon is like, okay, this is bigger than just, this is much broader. So again, we started looking at companies and on this commitment continuum and kind of yes, I was surprised by McDonald's there as well, considering who their customers are. But I mean, we can talk about that a little bit. But we started tracking companies and where they stood. The public rollbacks, and I will say this about the public rollbacks, some of this was in reaction to activist investors. Some of it was because of very conservative commentators um, going on social media, calling these companies out. Some of this, and we've done our own research, the state of C-suite research that we've done for 4 years, and we asked CEOs about this, and some said this actually started before the Trump administration took office, and their kind of desire to erase DEI. It was when the Supreme Court's decision came out in 23 in higher education. It was the University of North Carolina, if I have it correct, Michigan, where they basically struck down affirmative action in higher education. And
Yeah,
even though it was very specifically drawn for higher education, companies said if they're doing it
this is,
there,
yep.
this is just the beginning. So they started looking at their policies and procedures. And that's why your McDonald's and some of those other companies came out immediately because they were already working on this and planning this. To keep the heads down have been most companies that they just kind of were looking at their policies, procedures, and reframing, reimagining. One of our clients, because they had lots of conversations with clients, and they were saying that they were using AI actually on their internal documents and even on their website. And wherever it said DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion was together, it was being flagged by AI, and they were having a conversation about is this a policy we're going to keep? Is this something that we're just going to rename and reframe? Is this something that we're going to abandon? So that was what a lot of companies did. And then you had the companies that were the public defense of their policies. And yet again, as I said, Minnesota being one of these unexpected places that really kind of championed what was going on. Who'd have thought Costco was going to be the
You
brand
know,
that
exactly.
all of a sudden it was like, look at Costco. But they also, it was activist investors um, saying to the board of directors and saying to the stakeholders, shareholders, that you need to get rid of your DEI policies and procedures. And instead of doing what the Amazons of the world did, they said, you know what? No. And the board said, we support what we're doing. They took it to the shareholder and they unanimously voted, we're keeping DEI. And then shareholders unanimously, I don't know if it was unanimous, but shareholders said, we support what we're doing for DEI. And they kept. So again, all this information is out there. One of my favorite sources for this has been Forbes and the business publications
Okay.
because they look at this from what the businesses are doing. It's not just from a
Mm,
philosophical standpoint. And I read those things and I listen to those podcasts as well. But your Forbes also tracked it. There is a timeline of this is what each company is doing
yeah.
and from a business standpoint. The companies that were serious about it, that this was a part of our mission, our vision, and our values have stayed either steadfast or they have reimagined what they're doing. The ones that where it's performative, we see what has happened. They,
Mm-hmm.
as soon as the opportunity came along, they gutted their DEI departments. They got rid of their DEI chief diversity officers and those kinds of things. So
Mm-hmm.
it's all been done in plain sight. You just have to
Right.
do the research and look for it. And that's what I have continued to do in this deck that you shared. We have I update at least once or twice a month because there's just more data and more information that's coming out.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing this data with me, and we've added it to the chat. And you're right, like you sent me one copy, and right before the session, you were like, "Okay," I updated it again. So I really appreciate you doing that work because you're kind of sitting in a place where you can see across, kind of
Hmm.
at the balcony level, right? Like most of us are down doing our work in our organization, and you don't really know or get a sense of what's happening in the other areas. So the fact that you put out these reports and, documents, and things that help us understand it from that level, that's important because then you know how quickly things are moving or, what
Yes.
direction might be coming next. I also appreciate the nuance because I think it's easy to say, oh, well, I'm not buying from there. And I'm not, I remember I got to a point where I was like, wait a minute, I'm not going to be able to get nothing anywhere in
I
a hot
said the
second.
same
Like,
thing. I said the
right.
same
And like,
thing.
where does it matter for me to make those decisions that I should research these things? And so to see the way that you presented it allowed me to really become more nuanced in my purchasing habits. Like those that have completely rolled back, I know, and here's where I'm going to make my decisions, whether I'm going to put my money there or not. Um, and other things, right? Where I want to work or who I want to work with in terms of clients. You get to make those choices, and I feel like making those choices allows us to then promote and push up those organizations that are doing it well, right? Yeah, because
For
they should get
sure.
that support.
Nuance is really important. Google, and I'm looking at the chat as well. Google was one of the ones that they did come out publicly. But again, if you dig a little deeper, they did not completely abandon everything that they do from a DEI standpoint. One of the areas from a CSR standpoint that they had focused on was health equity. So if you look in their language, they decided as part of this rebranding or reframing or that has been going on. They don't call it health equity anymore. They call it health opportunity, but it's kind of still the same.
Okay.
So again, there's some nuances there as well. But they're another one of those that were getting public pressures from the Robbie Starbucks of the world and some of those conservative commentators and activist investors. So they did the public statement. So it wasn't a complete dismantlement from the Googles,
Yeah.
but they did some of that language. And in that deck that you share, I think there are like 3 or 4 slides of you see what companies like what it was to what they're doing now and kind of what their rationale was for that. Um,
Yeah.
but you're absolutely, but Target is one of those ones, and I'll never forget, I have it in there as well somewhere where CNN talked about how Target, it was so much more personal for many of us because Target had gone farther than other
Yes.
companies with their commitment, with their
It
partnerships.
was out there.
It was out there, and their commitment financially and creators of color, like bringing them into their stores and
Yeah.
all the things that they were doing and what they did for Pride and all this stuff. So it really did feel like a betrayal when they started rolling back because it's like you went further than many, many, many companies. And then for you to, at their first chance, to kind of roll back,
Yes.
whereas your competitor, the Costco and others, held strong, the first pressure you got, you kind of crumbled. So that is what so that was what and why the backlash for Target was so much more intense than some other organizations because they did so much and it was so verbal and we're in this together until we
Yeah.
weren't.
Right. And speaking of betrayal, McDonald's, come on now. That's where Calvin got his first job.
You know, if you go back to those old commercials, I can still hear some of the jingles that they had to all be all of it. So it that one hurt a lot and a lot from some of the things that they did. But again, they're also one of the ones like if you dig a little bit deeper, they still talked about they're not saying DEI, but they still talk about their commitment to inclusion and some of the things that they've done. I still feel as though McDonald's, you should have known better because who your customer base is, you didn't need to do it. I think you could have some of your folks would have still hung with you. So that one, like Target, feels like a betrayal just
Yeah.
because we've been with you for so long, thick and thin, for you to again fold at the first sign of trouble.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes, speak. So, next question that I want to ask you is really about the language, right? So just
Yes.
getting even more granular. Those of us who are in the field or are champions of this work, we had a shared language, and that shared
Mhm.
language is important so that we know that we're on the same page and we're building towards a common purpose. And now that we're using these different words, it's great because it means safety in trying to
Right.
redefine, but it also means possibly disconnection from each
Yes.
other. And also it could be erasure, right? You could water it down so much that now it really means nothing and it has no teeth. So, what's your kind of thinking around reframing that language? How do you
Right.
know when it's strategic versus erasure?
Uh, Good question. One of the biggest things that has come out of this reframing of the language is, and you kind of hit on it, it has made it harder to kind of track what's going on. For example, the S&P 500, every year those companies come out with their annual reports, and it is the equivalent of a bell curve. In 2020, you saw the numbers, and it's in the deck, the numbers that talked about DEI was a small percentage. All of a sudden, 2021, that number grew. 2022, it grew. Then all of a sudden, 2025, it fell almost 70% of companies having any indication of diversity, equity, inclusion in their reports. They just
Yeah.
didn't talk about it. And then again, another one, if you dig deeper, some of them were talking about it, but they weren't using that kind of language that we'd all coalesced around DEI that you could kind of
Yeah.
track it. So it makes it harder when you have to look and see what companies are doing with inclusion and belonging. One of our
Right.
clients uses inclusion and accessibility. A lot of this
Mhm.
work now has gone back from an HR perspective into employee engagement. So, yes,
Yeah.
some of it is smart strategy from what you have to do, but again, it just makes it a lot harder to uh, collectively see what we're all doing and really paying attention to folks who are still seriously doing this work and who are not. One of our top three clients is this Fortune 200 financial services company. And they went from DEI to calling it an inclusion and accessibility. And I support their work in that area and community work. They said, we are still doing everything we have been doing for the past several years. We're just not talking about it as publicly as we used to. They have
Mm.
16 employee resource groups inside their organization, and they cover everything from race and ethnicity and gender and orientation to they have ones for like one's called interfaith, one is called green for sustainability. I can't even remember all of them, but they
Yes.
have 16 different ones. So in some respects, because of the things that have gone on, the lens of inclusion has widened the definition of
Yeah.
what you can or what you're willing to do, and some of that has been positive. Again, when you go too broad, then it means nothing.
Hmm.
Again, then when it's smart strategy, um, um, some of those things just from a legal standpoint. A link I'm going to put in the chat is a place that I go to regularly. It's the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at NYU School of Law, and they are great because they're lawyers.
Yeah.
And they talk about it from a legal standpoint. And when you talk about smart strategy, it's some of this is how you're talking about from the language. I've heard a couple of their speakers at least 3 or 4 times. We're part of something called the PR Council, and they work with the PR Council. So for them, one of the presentations I saw with even some of your languages and how you're framing what you're doing as an organization, they did it as simple as red, green, yellow. Um, and they have some examples of like risky communications and how you can say the same or similar things, but do it where for now legally you can get away with it. For example, one example, um, risky communications, when you talk about hiring and promotion, they said a
Yeah.
risky statement was we use diversity hiring to recruit people from underrepresented racial and ethnic backgrounds. They said that's risky because that statement could suggest that an organization considers race and ethnicity when making employment decisions. So that could get you in
Okay.
trouble. They
Yeah.
said improved statements would be we conduct outreach at diverse colleges and universities to strive for a diverse applicant pool. Or
Mm.
we look for candidates of any background who will help advance our culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're not saying that we are intentionally counting numbers and we are looking just to hire on race and ethnicity, but it says we are making sure we have broad and diverse and inclusive candidate pools to help us
Yeah.
advance initiatives. Again, nuance, subtle
Yeah.
differences, but that's why I love that because again, thinking as a communicator, but working with lawyers and thinking about lawyers or working with HR people, thinking together like how can we
Yeah.
accomplish what we want to accomplish and but do it in a way that that won't get us in that won't get us in trouble, so to speak.
Exactly.
A little good
Exactly.
trouble is always good. Let's think John
Right.
Lewis. There's always good trouble.
There's always good trouble. But what can set you up so that you can continue doing the great work of your organization?
Yes.
Yeah,
Melissa said it really well. It sounds like strategy is the way to change, not just change for the sake of change. Yes, yes, yes,
that's right.
yes.
That is
And
so,
again,
so
it
true.
also goes back to your mission and your values. Um, does this align with your company's mission and values? And again, if you were just being performative, and if you put up the black box on your LinkedIn after George Floyd, or you do the rainbow for pride, and you don't really mean it, and you take that down after the moment, you weren't in
Yeah,
it to begin with. So
right.
that's really important too.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are reevaluating their values and reevaluating
Yes.
what they're doing in their lives and how it aligns, right? Because you can quickly fall out of alignment, and it's not like 5 years ago. Like you fall out of alignment, you find yourself in situations where you're like, uh-oh, like I should have built a community around people I feel safe
Yes.
with,
Yes.
working in a company where, my voice matters. It's important for us to go back to those things, get quiet, get to
Hmm.
our internal because there's so much noise. It's easy to forget your own personal true north. And,
100%.
that's what's going to keep us focused on continuing to go after the purpose, regardless of whether we have to change the path there.
100%. And that's why the pivot that you and your organization is doing is going to be critical because companies are trying to figure out at this moment in time, like, who are we? What do we stand for? What do we believe in? And oftentimes they can't do that from themselves. Some of the research that I've looked at, when we talk about social impact and CEOs and C-suite willing to speak out on social causes, there was a research in the Harvard Business Review in March, and when they asked these CEOs, like, who is the greatest influence on some of your decision making on whether or not you or your organization um, is willing to take a stand on some of these issues, and they said their personal beliefs and values. So it depends on what what they think as
Yeah.
individuals. The second one was the people around me, the other executives and employees. Third was consumers, external stakeholders. So that says something right
Wow.
there. So if
Yeah.
you're speaking in an echo chamber and you're just relying on yourself, or a
That's right.
few people working with you, then you get out of it what you put into it.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Wow. I learned so much from you. So we're gonna get three tips from you, and we can go to the next slide. Because you're my mentor. You don't know this yet, but you are now my formal mentor.
It's mutual mentorship.
And everyone's not gonna have that opportunity. So, what advice would you pass on to folks? And I said just three things because I know there's so much out there, and I think sometimes it's about boiling it down to what are the most
Right.
impactful things that are going to have the greatest difference. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
Things we should
Um,
focus
there are a few things that I do, and I've kind of hinted at some of them today. First thing in the morning when I'm doing my media scans of different things, I intentionally now kind of do a DEI scan of kind of what's going on in the world from a
on.
government policy standpoint, what corporations are doing. So two places that I go to, and some of you who work in HR may know of HR Dive. It is a website that is from HR professionals. I went there this morning, and SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Management, just had their annual conference in Orlando, and their CEO talked about like the state of transformation in DEI and what it means for HR for the next few years.
Yeah.
So that is a place I get their newsletter every day and I kind of look at it. So they give from like an employee standpoint and from an HR standpoint what's going on in the space. They do other things as well, but they always have things about that. I had mentioned, um, and if I'm not served up stories, I make sure I go to the Forbes and the Wall Street Journals and the
Yeah.
CNBC to get an understanding of what the business community is talking
Mm,
about or thinking about as it relates to DEI and where we're going. One of the things that we talked about, again, we refer to it as social impact. And a few years ago, we said, think of this Venn diagram. And it was like social impact was where altruism and pragmatism met. Social impact was in the middle.
mm,
Altruism was you're doing this thing because it's the right thing to do. Take health equity. Everybody deserves access to health, affordable health care.
yeah.
Pragmatism said, if we invest in preventative health care for people at all socioeconomic levels, it reduces our insurance costs. So again, those two
Mm,
things, like this is the right thing to do, this is the business outcome, overlay those, and that's where you stand at social impact. Right
yeah.
now, it's an imbalance where we're in this era of pragmatism. So
Yeah.
long-winded answer, but that's why I look at what businesses community is writing about because all of the things that most of the things that you're doing now, you have to have that business impact measurement to it. So
Yeah.
again, that's why I look at the business information, business reporting, and just seeing what companies are doing. And the third thing I do is, and we did this, a year or so ago, just looking at your internal policies and procedures just to make sure that
Yeah.
um,
Mm,
if an activist investor or if your management or if someone comes knocking that you've kind of done pressure tested it to see if you can withstand outside pressures from a language standpoint, from a policy standpoint, that it aligns. So those are some of the things. And the fourth thing you didn't ask before, and some of this is it, surrounding yourself with people. I have a group of friends here that work in PR that are African American and people of color that work in communications, and we've known each other for a long time. But over the past 5 years, 3 years, the relationships have been increasingly important because we
yeah.
can celebrate together, we can commiserate together, we can bounce ideas. It was like, hey, I have this situation going on at work. Um, am I overreacting or is there something going on here?
Yes.
Having those conversations that you can't have with everybody. And Cecilia, you and
Yes.
I talked about this in our last meeting. It's also that shorthand. Like, I don't have to explain everything.
Yeah,
Like, we can
hello.
get into the meat of the conversation
Yes.
without having to explain everything to them. So having those folks that you can have real conversations with is crucially important.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that one because I think that's really been my lifeline is connecting with like-minded people, with people I feel safe with. Because I know I got to go out in the world and I'm exposed to,
Yes.
folks that, may not have the best of intentions for me or people like me. And you feel it so much. And I feel like sometimes you feel so tender everywhere. Like,
Mhm, mhm.
I can't, don't, I'm gonna misinterpret that. Just back away because you're just, especially if you're in a black or brown body, right? If you're LGBTQ, if if you're Latino, it's so many different categories of folks that are feeling
Mhm.
directly targeted, and being around folks that you can let your guard down with, I
Right.
think, does so much for your mental health.
It 100%. It's interesting that you mentioned, Hispanics and Latino. I get served up because I'm looking for these things. I get served up a lot, and I've been seeing posts or reading things or podcasts from some Latinos who are white passing, and they talk about what a crazy experiences it is for them because sometimes they can be in those environments, and if people don't know, they will say things or they're exposed to things that you and I wouldn't be,
Yes,
and having to deal with that reality
that's
of
its
like
own kind of
its
crazy. Yeah,
own kind of craziness and those kinds of things where people think that it's just us. We can really say what we think. So that's a whole different kind of pressure. Same thing, LGBTQ plus and other things is like you don't necessarily know. So inhibiting those spaces where people feel comfortable saying any kind of thing,
yeah.
and you have to weigh on a daily basis in those kinds of situations. Is the day that you speak up and you say something, or is this one that um, um, you let it go? So, marginalized people all the time. We have that internal fight every day that we have to live with.
Yes.
Is the day the hill? Is this the hill I'm going to climb today, or am I going to save that energy for something else? And I have no right
Yes.
answer for that. Everybody's hill is going to be different.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. I love it. So I think the next one, and we're getting close to the end. So those of you who are in the audience, please feel free to send questions in. We have a few minutes set aside where we'll be able to do that. But what are your hopes for the future for this work?
That this work continues, and I do think it will continue. Again, it may not look the same as it did when we started this journey, but it's changing as I mentioned, and that's why I started off by talking about I went from urban affairs to multicultural marketing to where we are now. And I am optimistic about that. I think I mentioned there was a study from Metzger they did with this research organization called Catalyst, and it was a 2026 study, so it's recent. I think it was March, maybe April. Um, and 81% of like these 2,000 employees that they surveyed said that they still believe in the virtues of DEI and the importance of DEI and why it's important. So that is optimistic. So I feel optimistic about that. So I don't think this work is going to. DEI is not dead. As much as
Right.
people try to kill it, it will survive. It may look different, but it's not going away. I want to make sure you're right. Yeah. A 2026 survey of 2,000 employees conducted by Catalyst and Metzger said that most companies still have inclusion practices, even as many publicly distance themselves from DEI in 2025. 81% of the respondents said that their company is committed to inclusive workplace culture, fairness in policies and practices, and diverse representation.
Wow. That's
So
powerful.
again, so when you see these studies continue to come out, when you see these companies still doing these things, that gives me hope.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not saying we haven't been smart before. We have to be smarter about it, but we
Yes.
always have had to be smart about what we do to do this kind of work and be versatile and be flexible and pivot when we need to pivot.
That's right. That's right. And that study is now in the chat.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that with us, and
Sure.
we are sharing it with the listeners. I think we added something a little bit different in here. So Michelle, if you want to take us to, we have this thing called the lightning round, and I think
Okay.
that's next. Um, so you can pass if
Love
you're
it.
like, I'm not
Oh,
really
that's all right.
sure. Okay, here we go. What's your go-to comfort food after a tough day of changing the world?
Something chocolatey.
All right.
You
Okay. All right. Chocolate.
know?
I love it. Okay. If you weren't doing this work, what totally different job would you be doing?
It's funny. I always say that I would love to own a little cafe someplace where people can come in and get some good food and have some good conversations. I don't,
Yes.
I just still am, and that could be a retirement gig for me. But I don't want anything too big, but just a small little cafe where, like I said, we can have coffee or have a glass of wine and have some conversation and eat some good food and solve the problems of the world.
That's right. Oh, I love it. I would definitely be there. If Courage had a soundtrack, what song instantly gets you in the zone?
Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life. That album is, I feel like the soundtrack
Yeah.
of for my life. I remember I had a big birthday during COVID. It was like the real COVID year when it was a shutdown and nothing was happening. So I remember putting that on and just kind of like meditating on that and just like vibing on that as well. So that's one of my soundtracks that just kind of like uplifts, celebrates.
Yes. All right. I'm gonna have to put that on my list of things to do. If you could put one message on a billboard for every DEI practitioner right now, what would it say?
It would stay vigilant.
Ooh, I love that.
It's this work, there are forces that want us to give up. There are
Yeah.
forces that want us to be exhausted and to throw our hands up and say, I quit. But
Yeah.
we cannot because again, it goes back to if not me, then who? If
That's
not
right.
now, then when? So just stay vigilant.
Oh my gosh. I love that. I love that. And oh my gosh, the time has gone by so fast. And we're going to
Amen.
look for some questions here. But if you could, Michelle, push the slides up to our pictures so that folks can know how to get in touch with
Yes.
Jeff. Yes, definitely get in touch. I also, have a little plug for Padilla. If you need public relations or communication strategy support, consultant, please reach out to them. They're fabulous. I also have I've been doing resume writing at Get Her Hired. So if you need your resume
Love it.
makeover, check out Get Her Hired. It's really a cool place. But now I want to open it up for questions or any
Yes.
comments that you might have.
I see that one question in there from Brian about how executive leaders of color shift away from personally carrying the work to build in the organizational conditions um, for the work to become shared responsibility. I'm
Yeah.
stealing this from somebody else. There is the head of one of the large public relations firms, Fleischman Hillard, and I was on a DEI panel with him, and he talked about how this work needs to be a part of the backbone or the spine of the neural system of an organization. It is not one person's responsibility.
Mhm.
Like you should make sure that, how does HR show up when it comes to this DEI work? How is legal doing this? How is if you're customer service facing do this work? We work with organizations where we got all of these groups of leaders together, like legal, HR. If you still have a chief diversity officer, and had these kind of roundtable conversations of what you stand for, what you believe in, what are you willing to speak out about. It is not the responsibility of one kind of person, of one person or one department to do this. I know we feel like, and I still do feel like I carry the weight of the world, but I always say when people ask, what do people of color think? And I was like, you are getting a focus group of one when you ask me that question. I did not answer. I do not answer for all black people. I do not answer for all black men. I do not answer for all some. I answer for myself. So again, your organization needs to make a commitment and it needs to be a part of the neural system of your organization where every part of your organization sees where inclusion and belonging and diversity and equity is a part of what they're doing.
Yes, I love it. That is wonderful. Okay, let's see. Any other questions in the chat here? Well,
And if
as
not,
we're
please feel free to reach me on LinkedIn. They share my link. I'm always on LinkedIn. I love, again, I can do this all afternoon. So please don't hesitate to
yes.
reach out to me.
Well, I love this conversation and I took so much great information away as I do every conversation that we have. I feel uplifted. I feel like I'm not in it alone. And that's so important for this work. And I also, one thing I love about you is I feel challenged. And I think in this time and space, you're just so busy like trying to hunker down and just like stay,
Yes.
safe that you forget you still gotta grow and
Mhm.
evolve and innovate and try new things and learn. And I think that's probably the biggest message, that I'm taking away from today. The whole pay attention to what's happening in business, right? Even if you're not a business person, right? Even if you're in a nonprofit or education, because it's a clue, right? It's a window to
Yes.
what's happening. Any final words for us?
Again, thank you. Thank your organization. Thank those of you for showing up today. Again,
Yes,
this inspires me as well. I'm Cecilia, believe it or not, I get hunkered down and I get in the moment and heads down and how are we going to solve this problem today? How am I going to push that boulder up this hill? So having these opportunities in these safe spaces to have these conversations, it inspires me as well. It uplifts me as well. It gives me energy as well. It keeps me smiling. So again, thank you all for your time and your investment, and your commitment.
yes. Oh, wait, was there one in here? I just saw one come in. How would you recommend someone support someone in this work and encourage them to keep going without invalidating feelings of
Woo.
fear and despair?
Ooh, that's a whole hour right there. Some of what we're talking about doing this, Cecilia, you mentioned it, like you are not alone. Again, that's why finding your safe space and finding your people is really important because, and I think we've all have said that, you're talking to a friend is like, um, am I reading this the wrong way? Am I being crazy? Am I being too sensitive? So having those people that you can go to. And again, as you could tell, hopefully can tell from today, I'm very data driven. Like when I go to my boss, the president of the company about stuff, I come with like the data says this and the data says that. And the research is saying this, and that's why we need to do this
Yes,
thing. So I'm very much an emotional person that thrives on vibes and feelings and gut reactions, but I back it up with data as well.
I love it. And on that note, this has been Honest Talks with Changemakers. Thank you so much for coming
Thank
today, and
all
I
of
hope
you.
you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you, Jeff. This was great.
I
Thank you,
appreciate it. Thank you all
Cecilia.
for letting me come. Right.